Welcome to Sinister Truths, the channel where dark history, hidden stories, and unsettling realities come to light. Before we begin, let us know in the comments which country you're watching from and what time of day it is for you. And make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a chilling story. The sun had barely risen over the sprawling fields of the southern plantation, yet the air was already thick with the pungent scent of sweat, dust, and anticipation. It was auction day. The day when the plantation masters, wealthy men of influence and pride, gathered to buy, sell, and claim human lives as though they were mere commodities. Amidst the chaos of shouted prices and the stamping of boots, a young girl stood silently, her small frame nearly swallowed by the shadows of the wooden platform. Her eyes, dark and unyielding, scanned the crowd with a calm that belied her apparent youth. There was something unsettling in her composure, something that made those who glanced at her instinctively step back. She was 16, perhaps 17, yet she carried herself with an elegance and poise that seemed far beyond her years. Her hair, black as the night, was braided neatly, each strand shimmering faintly in the morning light. Her hands, though calloused from an unknown labor, were delicate, the fingers long and precise. Most of the other slaves on the platform fidgeted nervously, whispered to one another, or cried silently as their fate was auctioned off. But she, this girl who had cost almost nothing to bring to the platform, remained eerily calm, her gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond the crowd, as if she could see the future, or perhaps as if she knew it had already been written. The plantation master, Jonathan Wycliffe, had come to the auction with little intention of purchasing anyone that morning. He was a man in his late 40s, stout, with a face weathered by years of sunlight and hardship, though his eyes held the sharp glint of a man accustomed to power and authority. His plantation, Willow's End, stretched for miles, a testament to his wealth and the labor of countless men and women who were bound to the land. He had grown accustomed to the predictable nature of the auctions, young children too fragile, adults too rebellious, and teenage girls often soft, pliable, easily dominated. But the moment he saw her, everything changed. She stood at the edge of the platform, seemingly detached from the murmurs and bargaining that filled the air. Unlike the other slaves, there was no desperation in her eyes, no pleading glance toward potential buyers. There was a spark, a quiet defiance that drew Jonathan's attention like a moth to a flame. He approached the auctioneer, a man with a booming voice and an eye for profit, and gestured toward the girl. "How much for the girl at the corner?" Jonathan asked. His voice was calm, measured, but beneath it a current of curiosity stirred. The auctioneer paused, his gaze flicking between Jonathan and the girl. "Ah, that one," he said, lowering his voice so only Jonathan could hear. "Barely more than a child, barely worth a dime, they say. She came from a plantation over in Eastbridge. Owner passed away. Nobody wanted her. She's different." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" The auctioneer shrugged. "Quiet, smart, they say. Doesn't cry, doesn't beg, just stands there. Some folks say she's unnerving." Jonathan nodded slowly, feeling a strange pull toward her. There was something in the way she carried herself that made him uneasy, but in a way that sparked interest rather than fear. Perhaps it was her eyes, dark pools that seemed to pierce through the very air around her. Perhaps it was the way she held her head high, unyielding, as though the world had no dominion over her spirit. Whatever it was, Jonathan knew he had to have her. The bidding began. To his surprise, no one else seemed interested. Most of the men around him glanced at her and turned away, muttering about her being too strange, too unpredictable, too unprofitable. Jonathan, on the other hand, felt a rare thrill. He lifted his hand and the auctioneer called out, 19 cents, 19 cents for the girl at the corner." It was a laughable price, barely a penny in the grand scheme of his wealth yet. The feeling of owning someone so enigmatic, someone who carried an aura of untamed mystery, was intoxicating. Within moments, the hammer came down. She was his. 19 cents. That was all it had taken to claim her. As she was led off the platform, Jonathan studied her carefully. She did not look at him directly. She did not offer thanks or plead. She simply walked with measured steps, head held high, as if she were choosing to follow him on her own terms. The other slaves whispered among themselves, casting curious glances at the girl who had been purchased so cheaply, yet carried herself as though she were worth a fortune. Back at Willow's End, the plantation sprawled in all directions, a tapestry of green fields, whitewashed buildings, and the incessant hum of labor. Jonathan led her through the main house, past the grand dining hall with its polished wooden floors and the sprawling veranda overlooking the fields. The air smelled of polished wood and lingering tobacco smoke of wealth and authority. "This will be your quarters," Jonathan said, pointing to a small room near the servants' wing. It was modest, far smaller than the rooms reserved for the house staff, but it was clean and furnished with a simple bed, a wooden chest, and a basin of water. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and began to unpack a small bundle of belongings she had been allowed to keep. Her movements were precise, deliberate, each motion measured. Jonathan watched, fascinated. There was something about her that defied explanation, a quiet confidence that suggested she was more than just a frightened child sold into slavery. Days passed, and she began to settle into her new surroundings. She learned quickly, far faster than Jonathan expected. Within a week she could navigate the complex hierarchy of the household staff, understanding who held influence and who could be manipulated. She spoke little, but when she did, her words carried weight, often causing those who underestimated her to pause, reconsider, or comply. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Jonathan noticed. He could not deny that there was intelligence in her gaze, in the way she observed the world around her, in the way she seemed to understand people better than they understood themselves. The plantation workers, both enslaved and free, began to whisper about her. There were rumors, hushed conversations under the cover of night, about the strange aura she carried. Some said she was cursed, others said she was blessed, but all agreed on one thing: she was different. Jonathan, for his part, found himself drawn to her in ways he could not comprehend. It was not desire, not in the conventional sense. It was fascination, curiosity, a compulsion to understand this enigma he had purchased for almost nothing. He would watch her as she moved through the fields, interacted with the staff, and carried out her duties with meticulous precision. Every gesture, every glance seemed calculated, purposeful, as though she were always 3 steps ahead of the world around her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with streaks of orange and purple, Jonathan found himself walking through the servants' quarters. She was sitting on the steps outside her small room, a quiet smile playing on her lips as she watched the shadows lengthen across the fields. "You have adapted quickly," he said, startling her slightly. She looked up, meeting his gaze with the same unwavering calm that had first caught his attention at the auction. "I have no choice," she replied simply, her voice soft yet firm. "The world does not wait for the timid." Jonathan paused, struck by the weight of her words. There was wisdom there, a depth far beyond her years. It unnerved him, and yet it drew him closer. He realized, with a mixture of apprehension and intrigue, that he had not merely purchased a slave for 19 cents, he had acquired a presence, a force of nature that could not be ignored, in sharp and calculating, hidden behind a young, unassuming face. As night fell over Willow's End, the plantation seemed to hold its breath. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a sense of change, a shift in the invisible balance of power that even Jonathan could feel. He knew, deep down, that the girl he had bought for 19 cents was no ordinary child. She was a mystery, a puzzle, and perhaps, in ways he could not yet fathom, the key to events that would alter the course of life on his plantation forever. And so, the young girl, purchased for a price that barely registered in Jonathan Wycliffe's vast fortune, began her life at Willow's End, not as a mere servant, but as a quiet storm gathering strength, a presence that would soon reveal secrets far greater than anyone could imagine. The days at Willow's End moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm, each one marked by the relentless demands of labor, the quiet hierarchy of the household, and the ever-present hum of the surrounding fields. For most of the enslaved workers, the routines were predictable: rising before the sun, tending to the crops, preparing meals, cleaning the house, and enduring the watchful eyes of their overseers. But for the young girl, life on the plantation quickly proved to be far more complex than simple obedience. Her mornings began early, as the first rays of sunlight stretched across the vast green expanse of the estate. Unlike the other servants, she did not rush or fumble through her tasks. Instead, she moved with a measured grace, observing everything around her: the creak of the floorboards, the patterns of the wind through the trees, the subtle shifts in the expressions of those she served. Every glance, every gesture seemed calculated, deliberate. Even the older house servants, seasoned by years of hardship, noticed something unusual about her. "Have you noticed how she watches?" whispered Martha, a cook in the main house, to her companion one morning as they prepared breakfast. "It's like she can see right through you. I've never seen a child so aware." Her companion shivered. "Aye, it's unsettling. Sometimes I swear she knows things before they happen." Indeed, the girl's intelligence and perception were uncanny. She quickly learned the names, habits, and weaknesses of everyone around her. She understood which house servants held influence over others, which field hands were easily intimidated, and which overseers were strict but fair. She kept meticulous mental notes, forming strategies in her mind for how best to navigate the complicated social web of the plantation. Jonathan Wycliffe, the master of Willow's End, continued to observe her with a mix of fascination and unease. He had purchased her for almost nothing, yet her presence demanded his attention in ways he could not ignore. It was not just her intelligence, or the way she carried herself with poise and confidence. It was the sense that she was always aware of more than she let on. She seemed to understand the delicate balance of power within the household and, in some small, imperceptible ways, began to influence it without overtly doing so. One afternoon, as Jonathan walked through the main house inspecting the preparations for the evening meal, he noticed her in the kitchen. She was assisting Martha with the arrangement of dishes, her movements precise and deliberate. "You've become quite helpful," he remarked, leaning casually against the doorway. She looked up, her dark eyes meeting his without hesitation. "I try to be useful," she replied simply. There was no hint of fear, no hesitation in her voice, only the calm confidence of someone who knew exactly her place in the world, and, at the same time, something more. Jonathan frowned slightly, a strange feeling tugging at the edges of his mind. There was an intelligence in her gaze that unsettled him, a quiet power that he could not place. And yet, he found himself admiring her. He was intrigued by her resilience. Her ability to adapt so quickly to a life that had been thrust upon her. And by the way, she seemed to command attention without demanding it. Life in the servant quarters was not without its challenges. The other young slaves eyed her with suspicion, whispering behind her back, trying to decipher why she was different, why she seemed untouched by fear or desperation. They tested her, attempting to provoke anger, jealousy, or submission, yet she responded with quiet patience, her words measured, her actions deliberate. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon and painted the sky in shades of amber and violet, a group of young girls approached her. Their faces were a mixture of curiosity and challenge. "You think you're better than us?" one of them asked, her tone sharp, almost accusing. The girl's response was calm, almost serene. "I think I know who I am," she said. There was no malice in her tone, no need to assert dominance. Yet the words carried weight. The other girls, taken aback by her composure, fell silent, unsure how to respond. It was not long before her reputation began to grow. Whispers circulated among the servants, the girl who did not fear, the girl who seemed to understand everything, the girl who could quietly influence others without raising her voice. Jonathan noticed it too. Even the overseers, who prided themselves on maintaining order, found her presence unsettling. She was polite, obedient, and yet impossible to underestimate. Her skills extended beyond mere observation. She was quick to learn practical tasks, mastering the routines of the household in record time. She could cook with precision, clean meticulously, and anticipate the needs of those around her before they were even expressed. She moved through the house as though she had been born there, her actions fluid, her presence commanding respect without demanding it. Jonathan found himself increasingly intrigued by her abilities. He began to give her small responsibilities, testing her intelligence and resourcefulness. She managed them with ease, often exceeding his expectations. Yet there was always a sense that she was holding something back, that beneath her calm exterior lay a mind sharp and calculating, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. One morning Jonathan called her to his study. The room smelled of polished wood and old books, a testament to the wealth and education of its owner. He seated himself behind a large mahogany desk and motioned for her to sit across from him. "You are adapting remarkably well," he said, his tone measured but curious. "Most would struggle to survive here, yet you seem to thrive. How is that?" She regarded him with steady eyes, her posture straight and unyielding. "I have no choice," she replied. "The world is harsh, and one must learn quickly or be left behind." Jonathan nodded slowly. There was a wisdom in her words that struck him, a maturity far beyond her years. He realized that he was not dealing with an ordinary girl, but with someone extraordinary, someone who had survived, in ways he could only begin to understand. As weeks turned into months, the young girl's influence began to extend beyond the household. She interacted with the field workers, offering guidance and small assistance where needed, earning their trust and respect. Her presence was subtle but undeniable. Even the older slaves, who had been hardened by years of labor and oppression, began to notice her unique qualities. They spoke of her in hushed tones, expressing a mixture of admiration and unease. Jonathan watched all of this with a mixture of pride and apprehension. He had purchased her for 19 cents, expecting little more than a compliant servant, yet she had become an integral part of the household, a force that could not be ignored. Her intelligence, poise, and resourcefulness were unmatched, and he found himself increasingly dependent on her counsel and insight, though he rarely admitted it. Oh, Penley. There were moments, late at night when the house was quiet, that Jonathan would find himself reflecting on her presence. He realized that she was not merely surviving, she was thriving, shaping her environment in ways that were almost imperceptible. She had a natural ability to read people, to understand their motivations, and to influence them without overt action. It was a skill that few possessed, and Jonathan recognized its potential power. Despite her growing influence, she remained a mystery. Her past was largely unknown, her origins obscure. She spoke little of her family, her life before the auction, or how she had come to be sold for such a paltry sum. This secrecy only added to her aura, making her presence all the more compelling. Jonathan found himself drawn to her, not with desire, but with fascination, a need to understand the enigma he had acquired for almost nothing. Her impact on the household continued to grow. She mediated disputes among the servants with quiet authority, anticipated problems before they arose, and provided solutions that often left Jonathan astonished. She seemed to have a natural understanding of human nature, a skill that allowed her to navigate the complex, social hierarchies of the plantation with ease, yet there was always an undercurrent of something more. Something that suggested she was not merely a clever, resourceful girl, but someone with a hidden depth, a secret strength that had yet to reveal itself. Jonathan sensed it, though he could not define it, and it both intrigued and unsettled him. As the months passed, it became clear that the young girl was no ordinary slave. She was a presence that demanded attention, a force that subtly reshaped the environment around her. Her intelligence, poise, and influence extended beyond the household, reaching into the fields, the quarters, and even the minds of those who thought they controlled her. And all the while, she remained calm, composed, and seemingly untouchable, a quiet storm gathering strength, preparing for the moment when the true extent of her abilities would be revealed. Jonathan knew, deep down, that the girl he had purchased for 19 cents was more than he had ever imagined. She was not merely a servant, she was an enigma, a presence that would challenge the very foundations of Willow's End. And though he did not yet understand it fully, he sensed that her story was only beginning, that the hidden depths of her character would soon come to light, altering the lives of everyone on the plantation forever. Life at Willow's End had begun to settle into a rhythm, but the young girl, purchased for a mere 19 cents, was far from ordinary. She had adapted to her surroundings with remarkable ease, quietly observing, learning, and influencing the people around her. Yet beneath her calm exterior lay talents that no one, not even Jonathan Wycliffe, could have anticipated. It began subtly. Tasks that usually required supervision, such as organizing the storeroom or managing the schedules of the household staff, were completed with flawless precision under her watch. She anticipated shortages before they occurred, corrected minor mistakes before anyone noticed them, and often resolved disputes before they escalated. Her understanding of human nature was uncanny. Even the most obstinate workers, whether field hands or house servants, found themselves yielding to her gentle guidance. Jonathan first realized the scope of her abilities one humid afternoon. He had assigned her the task of organizing a large delivery of goods, barrels of flour, sacks of sugar, and crates of fruit that had arrived earlier than expected. The house servants had struggled to manage such deliveries in the past, often misplacing items or arguing over space. But the girl moved through the storeroom like a conductor directing an orchestra. She instructed the staff with calm authority, her voice soft but unshakable. By the time Jonathan returned from inspecting the fields, the storeroom was immaculate. Every item was accounted for, labeled, and neatly stacked. The staff, who normally bickered over the smallest details, were standing quietly, each seemingly aware of her expectations. Jonathan could hardly believe what he saw. "How did you manage this so perfectly?" he asked, more in wonder than in demand. She looked up at him, her dark eyes steady. "I watched and listened," she replied simply. "It is only a matter of knowing what needs to be done before it becomes a problem." Jonathan shook his head, both impressed and unsettled. It was clear she possessed a mind far sharper than her years suggested, a mind capable of organization, strategy, and foresight. But there was something deeper, more mysterious about her talents, that he could not yet place. Her abilities were not limited to household tasks. She had an extraordinary aptitude for learning. Within weeks, she had taught herself to read and write with remarkable skill, using discarded books from the master's study. She pored over the texts quietly at night, absorbing knowledge at a pace that astonished even the most learned of the household. Jonathan noticed her diligence and, intrigued, began to offer guidance, introducing her to more complex subjects: mathematics, geography, and history. To his surprise, she absorbed everything with ease. She not only remembered the facts but could apply them in ways that revealed a deep understanding of logic and strategy. When discussing the plantation's operations, she suggested improvements in workflow, rationing, and labor allocation that even the overseers had not considered. Her insights were precise, practical, and sometimes revolutionary. Word of her talents began to spread beyond the walls of the main house. Field workers, initially wary of her presence, came to respect her guidance. They noticed the way she treated them with fairness, listening carefully to their concerns and offering solutions that improved their daily lives. Even those who had been hardened by years of suffering found themselves drawn to her quiet authority. It was during one particularly tense period that her influence became undeniable. A series of poor rains had threatened the crops, causing anxiety among the workers and the overseers. Jonathan was away in town, leaving the management of the plantation to the staff. The workers grew restless, fearing loss of income and reprisal from their master. Arguments erupted in the fields, and tempers flared. The girl, observing the escalating tension, stepped forward. She spoke calmly, clearly, and with an authority that commanded attention. "We cannot control the weather," she told the workers, "but we can control what we do. Let us focus on what can be done together. The fields must be prepared, the crops protected, and the work divided fairly." Her words, though simple, carried power. The workers paused, considering her calmly spoken directives. Slowly they began to follow her instructions, dividing tasks efficiently and working in harmony where conflict had threatened. By the time Jonathan returned, the fields were organized, the crops tended, and the unrest quelled. He realized then that her talents extended far beyond intelligence and diligence. She possessed leadership, influence, and an almost intuitive understanding of people. Her hidden abilities did not stop at organizational or intellectual skills. She had an uncanny ability to anticipate the desires and moods of others. Jonathan noticed it in subtle ways: the way she prepared his meals exactly as he preferred, the way she arranged the household so that everything he needed was within reach, the way she could predict tensions between staff and mediate them before they erupted. It was as though she could read minds, understanding needs and intentions before they were spoken. One evening, Jonathan decided to test her abilities. He invited a visiting neighbor, a wealthy plantation owner with a reputation for shrewdness, to dinner. He casually mentioned that he had recently purchased a young slave girl of unusual intelligence. He watched closely as the girl served the meal, noting her composure and subtle gestures. To his astonishment, she managed the dinner flawlessly. She engaged the guests in polite conversation, anticipating their questions and responding with insight and tact. She offered suggestions that impressed even the most skeptical of the visitors. By the end of the evening, the neighbors were quietly admiring her, discussing her talents in hushed, almost reverent tones. Jonathan realized then that he had underestimated her potential. She was no ordinary child. She was a presence capable of influencing people far beyond the household, someone who could alter perceptions and shape outcomes with ease. Yet, she remained modest, never boasting, never seeking praise. Her power lay in her quiet confidence, in her ability to act without arrogance, and in her relentless pursuit of understanding. There were also moments of strange intuition that bordered on the uncanny. She seemed to sense danger, to anticipate conflicts before they arose. She warned of potential accidents, predicted shifts in mood, and subtly guided decisions in ways that often seemed miraculous. Jonathan, a man accustomed to controlling every aspect of his plantation, began to realize that the girl was, in some ways, his equal, or perhaps something greater. It was not just her practical skills that set her apart. There was an aura about her, a quiet strength that inspired both respect and caution. Those who encountered her could not easily dismiss her presence. She commanded attention without demanding it, influenced outcomes without force, and held the curiosity of everyone around her. One afternoon, she was helping a group of children in the quarters with their basic reading lessons. A young boy, frustrated and near tears, struggled with a passage. She knelt beside him, her patience infinite, guiding his hands and voice until the words were pronounced correctly. The other children watched in awe, sensing that this girl, though young, held wisdom far beyond her years. Jonathan observed from the doorway, struck by the contrast between her gentle demeanor and the undeniable power she wielded over her environment. She was a master of subtlety, a strategist cloaked in innocence, and he understood, with a mixture of admiration and unease, that her talents were only beginning to reveal themselves. As the weeks turned into months, the young girl's presence transformed Willow's End. The household ran more smoothly, the workers were more efficient, and tensions were lower. Yet there remained a sense of mystery around her. She spoke little of her past, deflected questions with ease, and never revealed the source of her extraordinary abilities. Even Jonathan, who had grown deeply invested in understanding her, found himself puzzled, intrigued, and increasingly dependent on her insight. It was clear that the young girl, purchased for a trivial sum, underestimated by everyone, was not simply surviving. She was thriving, shaping her environment in subtle, profound ways. Her talents were hidden, yet undeniable. She was a force that could not be ignored, a presence that demanded recognition, and a mind that promised to unravel mysteries far greater than anyone could imagine. Jonathan, observing her late one night as she read by candlelight, realized the truth. He had not bought a simple servant. He had acquired a prodigy, a strategist, a leader in miniature form. And though he did not yet understand the full extent of her abilities, he knew that the young girl would soon change the dynamics of Willow's End in ways that no one, not even himself, could anticipate. The plantation had been calm, predictable, and under Jonathan's firm control. But with the arrival of this extraordinary child, the winds of change had begun to blow. Her hidden talents were emerging, quietly, but unmistakably, and Jonathan understood that her influence would soon reach far beyond the walls of the household. She was not simply a girl to be managed. She was a presence to be reckoned with, a storm gathering strength, and a mind that could reshape the very fabric of life at Willow's End. And so, the young girl continued to move through her world with quiet grace, her hidden talents becoming ever more apparent, leaving Jonathan, and all who encountered her, both fascinated and unsettled. She had been bought for a pittance, underestimated by everyone, yet she had already begun to prove that her worth was immeasurable, her potential limitless, and her influence destined to grow. As the weeks passed at Willow's End, it became increasingly clear that the young girl was unlike anyone Jonathan Wycliffe had ever encountered. She possessed not only intelligence and skill, but an uncanny ability to influence those around her, a presence that demanded attention without commanding it. Her hidden talents had begun to ripple through the household and beyond, subtly reshaping the dynamics of the plantation. It was impossible for Jonathan to ignore her now, and though he was a man accustomed to control, he found himself drawn toward her in ways that both intrigued and unsettled him. It began with small gestures. Jonathan would occasionally summon her to his study, asking her advice on minor matters of household management. She offered insight with quiet confidence, suggesting changes that improved efficiency or prevented disputes before they arose. The results were undeniable, and Jonathan could not help but admire her judgment. Gradually, these private consultations became more frequent, and he found himself seeking her opinion on increasingly important decisions. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the veranda, Jonathan approached her quietly. She was sitting beneath an oak tree near the main house, her dark eyes fixed on the horizon, as if contemplating a world far beyond the confines of the plantation. "You have done well," he said, his tone more personal than professional. "The staff respect you. The household runs more smoothly. Even the field workers, who are usually difficult to manage, listen when you speak. Tell me, how do you manage it?" She looked at him without hesitation, her gaze steady. "I observe, I listen. People have strengths and weaknesses, fears and hopes. Understanding them allows one to guide them without force." Jonathan considered her words carefully. There was wisdom there, yes, but also a confidence and awareness that went far beyond her years. He felt a strange mixture of admiration, curiosity, and unease. She had not only adapted to Willow's End, she had begun to shape it in ways he could not control. Over the following months, the master's favor became evident. He provided her with privileges that were uncommon for someone of her status. She was allowed to assist in the study, access books and documents normally reserved for trusted overseers, and even attend gatherings in the main house where discussions of business and estate management took place. These opportunities allowed her to continue developing her talents, and she seized them with both intelligence and grace. Other members of the household took notice. Some were impressed, others wary. The older house servants, accustomed to rigid hierarchies, whispered among themselves. "Why does he favor her so?" they would ask. "She's just a child, barely more than a servant. Yet he treats her as though she is important." She paid little attention to these murmurs. Her focus remained on understanding and influencing her environment, yet it was undeniable that her rising prominence caused tension. Some of the older servants grew jealous, attempting to undermine her subtly, misplacing items she was responsible for, spreading rumors, questioning her decisions. She responded not with anger, but with careful observation, anticipating their schemes anew, realizing them quietly. In doing so, she earned not only the master's favor, but also a reputation for intelligence, fairness, and authority that few could challenge. Jonathan, for his part, found his fascination with her deepening. He began to see her as more than a servant or even a prodigy. She had become an essential presence in his life at Willow's End, someone whose insight and judgment he relied upon in ways he rarely admitted. It was a complex mix of pride, admiration, and a subtle unease, as if he recognized that the girl he had purchased for 19 cents was slowly becoming indispensable, not just to him, but to the entire plantation. Her influence extended beyond the household and staff. Neighboring plantation owners, invited to gatherings or casual dinners, began to notice her talents as well. She spoke with poise and clarity, answering questions thoughtfully, offering solutions to minor disputes, and demonstrating an awareness of matters far beyond her apparent age. Many were impressed, though some viewed her rising influence with suspicion. A few whispered that Jonathan had given her more power than was appropriate, while others speculated about her mysterious origins. The girl remained unfazed by attention, positive or negative. She did not seek recognition, yet it followed her nonetheless. Her strength lay in her calm confidence, and her ability to act with intelligence and tact rather than through force or intimidation. Even the most skeptical of neighbors could not deny her presence, and slowly, a quiet respect began to grow among them, though mingled with curiosity and caution. Jonathan began to test her in more personal ways, intrigued by her insight into both people and circumstances. He would pose hypothetical problems, asking her to suggest solutions for matters of estate management, conflict resolution, or even diplomacy with neighboring plantations. Her responses were always measured, logical, and often more astute than those of experienced adults. Sometimes her suggestions were unconventional, but they invariably proved effective. One evening, after a particularly taxing day of negotiations with a rival plantation owner, Jonathan found her seated beneath the veranda's lantern light, reading a small book of maps and local geography. He sat beside her, careful not to startle her. "You have a gift," he said quietly, almost reverently. "Most would never think to approach these matters with such clarity and insight. How do you see what others cannot?" She closed the book, looking at him with a calm composure. "I listen, and I observe. People reveal themselves in small ways, gestures, expressions, words unspoken. Understanding them allows one to predict outcomes and act wisely. It is not magic, it is attention." Jonathan nodded slowly, struck by the depth of her wisdom. He realized that her abilities were not just in intellect or skill, but in perception, the ability to understand the world and the people in it more clearly than almost anyone he knew. The master's favor, however, was not without its complications. Other household members, seeing the girl's rising influence, began to challenge her in subtle ways. A housekeeper would question her recommendations. A field overseer would attempt to assert authority over her directions. She responded with patience and tact, never raising her voice, never showing anger. Instead, she used logic, empathy, and subtle persuasion to guide outcomes in her favor. Slowly, the challenges faded, and she established herself as a quietly formidable presence within the plantation hierarchy. Her growing influence also began to affect the way Jonathan viewed his own power. He had always prided himself on control, over his estate, his workers, and even over his household. Yet he found himself increasingly aware that the girl he had purchased for 19 cents was shaping decisions, guiding actions, and subtly influencing outcomes. It was a revelation that both impressed and unsettled him. He realized that her intelligence, poise, and perception were forces to be reckoned with, forces that could not be ignored or underestimated. Yet despite her growing authority, she remained humble. She did not flaunt her abilities or seek praise. Instead, she focused on understanding, guiding, and improving the environment around her. Her quiet confidence inspired respect, even admiration, and created an atmosphere of calm efficiency that permeated the plantation. Workers who had once been fearful or skeptical began to approach her for guidance, and her influence became an integral part of life at Willow's End. Jonathan's fascination with her continued to deepen. He began to realize that the girl's talents extended far beyond practical skills or intelligence. She had a rare ability to see the true nature of people, to anticipate their intentions, and to influence outcomes without overt force. It was a power that few possessed, and one that he had come to rely upon more than he had anticipated. The girl's presence was changing Willow's End in subtle but profound ways. The household ran more smoothly, the workers were more efficient, and tensions were reduced. Yet there remained an air of mystery around her, a sense that her full potential had not yet been revealed. Jonathan sensed that her influence would continue to grow, and he could not predict where it might lead. Late one evening, as the moonlight filtered through the veranda and illuminated the quiet plantation, Jonathan reflected on the transformation that had occurred since her arrival. The girl had been purchased for a trivial sum, underestimated by everyone, and yet she had become an essential presence, someone whose insight, intelligence, and subtle authority shaped every aspect of life at Willow's End. He understood then that her talents were extraordinary, her potential limitless, and her influence destined to expand. And though he did not fully comprehend the depths of her abilities, he knew that she was far more than a mere servant. She was a presence that commanded attention, a mind that inspired both curiosity and caution, and a force that would soon reveal even greater power than he could imagine. Jonathan's favor continued, providing her with opportunities to grow, observe, and influence. And with each passing day, it became clearer that the young girl, bought for 19 cents and underestimated by everyone, was quietly, inexorably reshaping Willow's End, setting the stage for events that would challenge expectations, disrupt hierarchies, and reveal secrets long hidden. She was no longer simply a girl or a servant. She was a presence, a strategist, and a mind that demanded recognition. And the master, despite his wealth, authority, and experience, could not escape the growing realization that her influence was profound, and that her story was only beginning. The young girl had been at Willow's End for nearly a year now, and the plantation had transformed under her quiet, meticulous influence. What had begun as subtle guidance had grown into undeniable authority. She organized the household with unmatched efficiency, smoothed tensions among the workers, and even helped Jonathan make decisions that strengthened the estate's operations. Yet despite her rising prominence, there remained an enigma surrounding her past, a secret she guarded with unwavering care. Jonathan often found himself reflecting on this. How could someone so young possess such wisdom, insight, and confidence? Her abilities were extraordinary, yes, but there was something else, something deeper, a presence that seemed tied not merely to intellect, but to something innate, almost hereditary. He had tried to probe her past gently, asking questions about her family, her upbringing, the life that had preceded Willow's End, but she always deflected, answering vaguely or not at all. And then, one afternoon, a subtle clue appeared, as though fate itself had chosen to reveal it. Jonathan had been reviewing estate accounts in his study when a visiting courier arrived with a letter from a distant town. The envelope was worn, sealed with an emblem Jonathan did not immediately recognize. Curious, he opened it, reading the contents aloud to the girl, who had been quietly observing the proceedings. The letter spoke of a young woman, intelligent, poised, and of extraordinary character, whose family had connections of influence and wealth, though much of their fortune had been lost to misfortune and tragedy. Jonathan's heart quickened as he scanned the words. There were details in the description that matched the girl perfectly. Her age, her demeanor, her unusual talents. The girl remained silent, her eyes fixed on the paper as though she had seen it before. Jonathan, sensing the gravity of the moment, looked at her directly. This letter, it speaks of a family of some influence. It mentions you. Her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile, almost imperceptible. I had expected this day would come, she said softly. Her voice was calm, yet carried the weight of someone who had carried secrets far too long. There are connections in my life that most do not see. My family, they are not as simple or as poor as they appear. Jonathan's mind raced. He had always sensed there was more to her than met the eye, but to hear her confirm it was staggering. The girl, purchased for 19 cents at an auction, was connected to a lineage of influence, a family whose name carried weight, and whose reach extended far beyond the confines of Willow's End. Over the next days, the revelation quietly began to affect the household. Jonathan could not help but observe her with renewed fascination. The workers, unaware of her lineage, continued to respect and admire her for her skills and guidance, but the subtle aura of authority she carried now seemed magnified, tinged with a mystery that none could fully understand. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, the girl confided in Jonathan, revealing fragments of her past. She spoke of a family once prosperous, a home filled with knowledge and learning, and connections to influential figures who had once held power in society. She spoke of loss, of betrayal, of circumstances that had led to her being sold at auction, a victim of fate, yet resilient and resourceful in ways that defied her years. Jonathan listened, captivated. Her story was not just one of survival, but of intelligence, strategy, and perseverance. She had adapted to her new life with skill, and yet, beneath it all, she carried the legacy of her family. A legacy that had not been extinguished by circumstance. Word of her mysterious background began to reach the neighbors, though in fragmented whispers. Some speculated about her origins, others about her talents, and a few daring souls even attempted to pry into her past. Yet she remained calm, revealing only what she chose to, always maintaining her composure and quiet authority. Her knowledge of her lineage, combined with her extraordinary abilities, created an aura that commanded respect, even fear, among those who sought to understand her. Jonathan, increasingly aware of the girl's hidden connections, realized that her influence extended far beyond Willow's End. She was not merely a servant, she was a presence capable of shaping the perceptions and actions of people far more powerful than any household worker. Her intellect, poise, and insight had been honed not only by necessity but by the legacy of her family. As the weeks progressed, subtle signs of her connections began to surface. Letters arrived from distant relatives, offering guidance, information, or inquiries about her well-being. Visitors occasionally came to Willow's End, curious about the young girl who had risen so rapidly in influence. Each interaction revealed fragments of her past, pieces of a puzzle that Jonathan and the household had only begun to understand. The girl, ever composed, navigated these developments with grace. She maintained her duties, guided the household, and managed the workers, all while carefully controlling the narrative of her own past. It was clear that she had learned to wield her lineage and intelligence as tools, strategically, subtly, and with remarkable effectiveness. One particularly revealing moment occurred when a distant relative arrived unexpectedly. The man, an older figure of considerable presence, recognized the girl immediately, addressing her with a mix of respect and surprise. "It has been many years," he said. "I did not expect to find you here under these circumstances. Your talents, they are unmistakable, and your composure remarkable." The girl acknowledged him with a polite nod, her eyes calm, her expression unreadable. "Circumstances have a way of shaping us," she replied softly, "and some connections, though hidden, always endure." Jonathan, standing nearby, observed the exchange with a mixture of awe and apprehension. He understood that the girl's influence was rooted not only in her abilities, but also in the legacy she carried. A legacy that could have far-reaching implications for Willow's End, the surrounding plantations, and perhaps even society beyond. The revelation of her connections began to shift the dynamics within the household subtly. House servants, aware that the girl had ties to influential figures, treated her with a heightened level of respect. The field workers, though still unaware of her lineage, sensed the change in authority and responded accordingly. Jonathan, meanwhile, found himself navigating a new relationship with her, one that balanced admiration, reliance, and a cautious recognition of her growing influence. Yet the girl herself remained enigmatic. She revealed only what was necessary, maintaining a careful balance between disclosure and discretion. Her ability to manage information, coupled with her intelligence and insight, allowed her to maintain authority without provoking envy or resistance. She was, in effect, a master of perception, shaping the way others viewed her while quietly consolidating her influence. Over time, the realization of her hidden connections began to shape Jonathan's own decisions. He recognized that her lineage, combined with her talents, could provide opportunities for alliances, protection, and growth that he could not achieve alone. Yet he also understood that her influence carried risks. Her presence, if misunderstood or challenged, could destabilize the carefully managed hierarchy of Willow's End. The girl, ever aware of her position, navigated these complexities with remarkable skill. She continued her work, guided the household, and influenced the workers, all while managing the delicate revelation of her past. Each action, each word, was calculated to maintain authority, respect, and subtle power. It was during a quiet evening, as the plantation settled under a blanket of stars, that Jonathan realized the full scope of her capabilities. She was not only intelligent and resourceful, she was strategic, perceptive, and aware of the broader implications of her existence. Her hidden connections were not merely a curiosity, they were a foundation for influence, a tool that, if wielded wisely, could reshape the world around her. Jonathan, reflecting on the journey from the day he purchased her for 19 cents to the present, understood that he had underestimated the girl in ways he could never have imagined. She had transformed Willow's End, not through brute force or rebellion, but through intelligence, subtlety, and the quiet power of her lineage. Her story, he realized, was far from complete. The revelation of her hidden connections had only begun to surface, hinting at a future filled with intrigue, power, and influence. The girl, purchased for a paltry sum at an auction, was no longer merely a servant. She was a force of nature, a presence that commanded respect, and a mind whose potential was only beginning to be understood. And so, as the moonlight bathed the fields of Willow's End, the young girl remained a figure of quiet power. Her hidden connections, combined with her extraordinary abilities, had begun to shape the destiny of the plantation in ways that no one, not even Jonathan, could fully anticipate. The stage was set for events that would reveal the full extent of her influence, challenge expectations, and alter the lives of all who dwelled within the shadow of Willow's End. Her past, once hidden in shadows and secrecy, had begun to emerge, and with it, the promise of a story far greater than anyone could have imagined, a story of resilience, intelligence, and power, forged in circumstance and refined by the quiet mastery of a girl whose worth could never truly be measured in coin. The quiet hum of Willow's End had changed, though many of its residents did not yet know why. The young girl, purchased for a mere 19 cents, had become the center of attention, her influence quietly spreading through the household and the fields alike. Her presence commanded respect, her insight guided decisions, and her mysterious lineage had begun to surface in fragmented whispers. Yet despite all this, no one, including Jonathan Weckliffe, was prepared for the full revelation that was about to unfold. It began one afternoon with an unexpected visitor, arriving in a carriage marked by fine, gleaming insignia, and flanked by attendants whose posture and bearing left no doubt as to their social standing. The arrival of such a figure was rare for Willow's End, a plantation distant from the bustle of towns and commerce. The household staff were startled, uncertain how to respond to the sudden intrusion. Jonathan, intrigued and slightly apprehensive, approached the carriage personally. The man who descended was tall, impeccably dressed, with eyes that reflected both authority and curiosity. He carried himself with the assurance of someone accustomed to power. As he strode toward Jonathan, the young girl, alert and composed, stepped forward from the veranda, her dark eyes meeting the stranger's gaze with the calm poise that had long unsettled Jonathan. "Jonathan Wycliffe," the man said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "I am Lord Ashbourne, and I believe you have in your household someone I have been searching for. A young woman of notable lineage and remarkable abilities." Jonathan felt a jolt of recognition and confusion. He glanced at the girl who remained silent, her posture composed, her expression unreadable. "I am not certain I understand," Jonathan said cautiously. "If you are speaking of a young girl I purchased, she has been a member of this household for some time. Her abilities are exceptional, yes, but I know little of her past." Lord Ashbourne's eyes shifted to the girl. "Then perhaps she herself can clarify," he said, inclining his head. "She is the last surviving heir of the Ashbourne estate, lost to circumstance but never forgotten. Her family was once prominent, influential, and connected to matters of wealth and power throughout the region. It is time that her place be acknowledged." The girl's eyes met his, steady and unwavering. She inclined her head slightly, as if confirming a long-held expectation. "It appears the time has indeed come," she said softly. Her voice, calm yet firm, carried the weight of authority, the recognition of her true heritage. Jonathan could hardly believe what he was hearing. All along he had sensed that she was extraordinary, but to discover that she was of noble lineage, connected to a family of influence and renown, was staggering. The girl, purchased at auction for a pittance, was not merely talented. She was an heiress, a figure whose name and connections could command power far beyond Willow's End. Lord Ashbourne stepped closer, producing letters, documents, and genealogical records that detailed her family's history. Jonathan watched in awe as the girl reviewed them with calm efficiency, nodding occasionally, her eyes reflecting both recognition and quiet pride. She had known of this heritage clearly, yet had waited for the right moment to reveal it, or perhaps to ensure she had the power and composure to handle the revelation with precision. "This changes everything," Jonathan muttered under his breath. The realization of her true status sent ripples through his mind. He had thought himself in control, guiding the household, managing the plantation, and wielding authority over those within his domain. Yet here was a young girl, barely more than a teenager, whose very lineage, combined with her intelligence and skill, could influence outcomes far beyond his reach. The revelation quickly spread through the household. The staff, initially skeptical, came to understand the gravity of the situation. The fieldworkers, though unaware of the finer details of her heritage, sensed a shift in authority. Even those who had once questioned her abilities now treated her with heightened respect, recognizing that her influence extended far beyond ordinary circumstances. As the days passed, the full implications became apparent. Letters arrived from distant family members, offering guidance, support, and introductions to influential figures. Visitors came to Willow's End, curious to meet the young girl who had risen from obscurity to become a figure of remarkable influence and pedigree. Each encounter further confirmed her abilities and her heritage, cementing her position not only within the household, but in the broader social landscape. Jonathan, reflecting on these developments, realized the depth of his own underestimation. He had purchased her for 19 cents, assuming she would serve as a capable but ordinary servant. Instead, he had acquired a mind of brilliance, a character of resilience, and now a lineage of influence that demanded recognition. The girl's talents, combined with her noble connections, positioned her as a figure capable of reshaping not only the dynamics of Willow's End, but the wider world around her. The girl herself navigated these revelations with calm precision. She accepted recognition without arrogance, directed attention without seeking it, and subtly guided those around her to understand her authority. Her insight into human nature, her strategic mind, and her natural composure allowed her to consolidate her position gracefully. She was, in effect, a master of influence, understanding the delicate balance between power, perception, and action. One evening, Jonathan observed her in the garden, reviewing documents and maps with Lord Ashbourne. Her posture was straight, her focus unwavering. It was clear that she had fully embraced her heritage, yet she moved with the humility and poise that had always defined her. She was a figure of authority without arrogance, a presence that inspired both admiration and careful respect. Jonathan approached quietly. "You have taken control of circumstances far beyond what I imagined," he said softly. "Your abilities, Your heritage, it is extraordinary." She looked at him calmly, a faint smile playing at the edges of her lips. "Circumstances define us only if we allow them," she said. "I have been given an opportunity to shape outcomes, and I intend to do so wisely." The revelation of her lineage brought new opportunities but also new challenges. Some neighboring plantation owners viewed her rising influence with suspicion. Others sought alliances, recognizing the potential benefits of associating with someone of her abilities and connections. Even within Willow's End, the household had to adjust to the shift in authority, as the girl's position was no longer simply based on her skills, but also on her heritage and rightful standing. Yet she handled these challenges with the same strategic mind and calm authority that had defined her since her arrival. She anticipated reactions, managed perceptions, and guided interactions to achieve the desired outcome. Her presence became a stabilizing force, ensuring that the household functioned smoothly, while also preparing for broader engagement with the world beyond the plantation. Jonathan, increasingly aware of the girl's extraordinary capabilities, reflected on the journey from the day he had purchased her for 19 cents to the present. He had underestimated her, yes, but he had also witnessed the unfolding of a remarkable story, a story of resilience, intelligence, and now, revealed heritage. She was not simply a servant, she was a strategist, an influencer, and a figure of noble lineage whose presence would have lasting consequences for Willow's End and beyond. The young girl's revelation also had a profound impact on her own self-perception. She had survived hardship, adapted to adversity, and cultivated her talents with careful precision. Now, with the acknowledgement of her heritage, she gained not only validation but also a framework for leveraging her abilities in ways that could influence the broader social and political landscape. Her lineage provided access, credibility, and a legacy that, combined with her skills, positioned her as a figure capable of shaping events on a scale few could imagine. As the days turned into weeks, the full impact of her revelation became apparent. Willow's End, once a relatively ordinary plantation, had transformed into a hub of influence, guided by the strategic mind of a young girl whose abilities and lineage were now fully recognized. Jonathan, though still the master in name, came to understand that true power now resided not solely in his wealth or authority, but in the presence of the girl whose story had begun with a purchase for 19 cents and had now unfolded into something extraordinary. And so, the revelation of her heritage marked not an end, but a beginning. Her abilities, already remarkable, were now augmented by her rightful connections, allowing her to navigate the world with strategic precision. She had emerged from obscurity to become a figure of influence, intelligence, and authority, an unexpected force at Willow's End, whose presence would shape the lives of all who encountered her, including Jonathan Wycliffe himself. The storm of her potential, once quiet and subtle, had now been acknowledged openly. The young girl, with lineage, talent, and insight, stood poised to redefine the boundaries of power, influence, and respect. Her journey, though far from complete, had already transformed the plantation, challenging expectations, reshaping perceptions, and setting the stage for events that would echo far beyond the gates of Willow's End. She was no longer merely the girl bought for 19 cents. She was a revelation, a force of intellect and heritage, a presence whose story was only beginning, and whose impact would soon be felt far beyond the fields and halls of the plantation she now called home. The revelation of her heritage had transformed Willow's End, and yet the young girl's influence was far from complete. What began as subtle guidance had now grown into a quiet dominion over the household, and, increasingly, over the fields and workers themselves. The plantation, once tightly controlled by Jonathan Wycliffe, began to operate under a new, invisible authority, one commanded not by wealth or fear, but by intellect, strategy, and quiet presence. Jonathan observed this shift with a mixture of fascination and unease. He had always prided himself on control, on the ability to maintain order and command respect through his position, experience, and wealth. Yet now, he found himself second-guessing decisions, aware that the girl's influence often extended beyond his immediate perception. She had become indispensable, her insight invaluable, her ability to anticipate events uncanny. The change was first apparent in the household. Tasks were completed with greater efficiency, disputes were resolved before they escalated, and the staff had come to respect her authority, even when it subtly contradicted the master's instructions. Jonathan noticed small things, how the housekeeper deferred to her guidance, how the cooks followed her suggestions for organizing meals, how even the older, skeptical servants adjusted their behavior to align with her expectations. "What are you doing to this household?" Jonathan asked one evening, standing in the kitchen as she supervised the evening preparations. She looked up, calm and composed. "I am ensuring it runs as it should," she replied simply. "The household will function more smoothly if people understand their roles and respect one another's strengths." Jonathan shook his head, half amused, half astonished. "You've gained authority over them without raising your voice, without commanding them directly." "How?" She smiled faintly. "Leadership is not always about giving orders. Sometimes it is about understanding people and guiding them so they choose to follow." Her words lingered in his mind, unsettling yet undeniably true. He realized that her influence had grown to the point where she could shape outcomes without appearing to assert control. The household functioned not under his explicit authority, but in response to her quiet guidance. The shift extended beyond the household. In the fields, the workers began to notice her presence as well. She walked among them regularly, observing the crops, offering advice, and addressing concerns with patience and fairness. They responded to her guidance not out of fear but respect. Unlike the overseers who relied on threats and punishment, she wielded influence through understanding, empathy, and strategic insight. One afternoon, a minor dispute erupted among the field hands over the allocation of labor for an upcoming harvest. Voices were raised, tempers flared, and the overseers were uncertain how to intervene without escalating tension. The girl, observing from a distance, stepped forward with her usual calm composure. "Stop," she said softly but with authority. The workers fell silent, their attention drawn to her presence. "We are all working toward the same goal. Let us divide the tasks fairly, considering strengths and experience. Those who are skilled in planting will handle planting. Those who excel at harvesting will lead that work. Cooperation, not conflict, ensures we succeed." Her solution was practical, fair, and well considered. Slowly, the field hands began to follow her guidance, reorganizing themselves efficiently. By the time Jonathan arrived to check on the progress, the dispute had been resolved, the work completed, and the atmosphere calm once more. Jonathan, observing this, understood that her influence was no longer limited to subtle adjustments in the household. She had begun to command authority among the laborers themselves, creating a new dynamic where her presence and guidance shaped the daily operations of the plantation more than his oversight ever could. Yet, this shift in power was not without consequences. Some of the overseers began to feel challenged, subtly resisting her influence or questioning her authority. A few of the older house servants, envious of her rise, attempted to undermine her with quiet gossip or minor acts of defiance. But each challenge was met with her strategic composure. She did not confront directly. Instead, she anticipated reactions, redirected conflicts, and maintained authority through logic, fairness, and perception. The more she integrated her hidden talents with her emerging authority, the more she reshaped the power dynamics of Willow's End. The household and the fields operated under an invisible network of guidance, her guidance, where loyalty was earned not through fear or coercion, but through respect and acknowledgement of her insight. Jonathan, aware of this, found himself both impressed and wary. He realized that he had underestimated her potential from the moment he purchased her for 19 cents. Her rising power also extended into social interactions with neighboring plantations. Word of her abilities, intelligence, and poise spread quietly, often through those who had witnessed her handling of disputes, her strategic guidance of the household, or her calm negotiation with field workers. Neighbors began to treat Willow's End with a new level of respect, acknowledging not only Jonathan's authority as the plantation master, but also the subtle force exerted by the young girl. Some sought her advice, others approached with caution, uncertain how to navigate the presence of someone whose influence was both indirect and undeniable. Jonathan, though initially protective of his own authority, began to rely increasingly on her judgment. She offered insights into negotiations, labor allocation, and even financial decisions. He realized that her talents extended beyond practical management. They encompassed perception, diplomacy, and the understanding of human nature. She was not merely an aide. She was a strategist capable of guiding the course of the entire plantation. One evening, as they walked through the fields together, Jonathan remarked, "You have changed everything here. The household, the workers, even the way the neighbors perceive Willow's End. Your influence is undeniable." She nodded calmly, her eyes scanning the horizon. Influence is not always measured by wealth or authority. Understanding, strategy, and perception are far more powerful tools. Control is best exercised subtly, allowing others to act willingly while guiding outcomes as needed. Jonathan considered her words carefully. He realized that her philosophy of power was far more sophisticated than his own, which had relied heavily on wealth, status, and overt authority. She had created a system in which respect and loyalty were earned, not forced, a system that operated quietly, yet effectively, reshaping the entire plantation. The shift in power also began to affect Jonathan personally. He noticed changes in his own decision-making, as he increasingly sought her counsel and perspective. Her insight often revealed blind spots he had not considered, and her strategic guidance allowed him to navigate challenges with greater confidence. He had always prided himself on control, yet he now understood that true mastery of Willow's End required collaboration with someone of her skill, intelligence, and perceptive ability. Despite her growing authority, the girl remained composed, humble, and focused. She did not flaunt her influence, nor did she seek recognition beyond what was necessary. Instead, she continued to observe, learn, and guide, ensuring that every decision, every action, and every interaction aligned with the broader goals of the household, the plantation, and her own carefully considered strategies. Her presence began to unify the plantation in ways Jonathan had never imagined. Workers, servants, and overseers alike recognized her as a stabilizing force, someone whose guidance could prevent conflict, enhance efficiency, and foster cooperation. Even those who initially resisted her authority gradually came to respect it, acknowledging her insight and strategic acumen. As the months passed, the power dynamics of Willow's End had fundamentally shifted. Jonathan, though still the master in name, had come to recognize that the true force shaping the plantation was the young girl he had purchased for 19 cents. Her intelligence, her composure, and her ability to influence outcomes had created a new hierarchy, one based not on wealth or fear, but on understanding, strategy, and subtle authority. The full scope of her abilities was becoming increasingly clear. She had integrated her knowledge of human nature with her strategic skills, creating a network of influence that spanned the household, the fields, and even the neighboring plantations. Her hidden connections, her intelligence, and her composure combined to form a force that could not be ignored. Willow's End was no longer simply a plantation under Jonathan's control. It was a system shaped by her guidance, her insight, and her strategic foresight. One evening, Jonathan reflected on the transformation. The girl, once purchased for a trivial sum at auction, had become indispensable. Her presence had shifted the power dynamics, not through force or rebellion, but through intelligence, perception, and quiet influence. She had become a leader, a strategist, and a stabilizing force whose authority extended far beyond her years or apparent status. Jonathan understood then that her influence would only continue to grow. The household, the workers, and the neighboring plantations had all begun to recognize her as a figure of authority, insight, and strategic vision. She was no longer merely a girl or a servant. She was a force, a presence whose quiet power had reshaped the very foundations of Willow's End. And so, as the moon rose over the sprawling fields and the lanterns flickered softly in the main house, the young girl moved through the plantation with calm authority, her influence shaping every action, decision, and interaction. She had shifted the balance of power, transforming Willow's End into a system guided not by wealth or fear, but by insight, strategy, and quiet mastery. Jonathan, observing her from the veranda, understood that he had underestimated her in ways he could never have anticipated. The girl he had purchased for 19 cents had become the true architect of Willow's End, a figure of intelligence, influence, and subtle authority whose presence would continue to reshape the plantation for years to come. The storm she had quietly unleashed was now undeniable, and its consequences, both seen and unseen, would ripple through Willow's End, altering the lives of everyone within its boundaries. She had proven that power was not measured by coin, by status, or by fear, but by understanding, strategy, and the ability to influence those around you without overt force. In every glance, every gesture, and every carefully considered action, the young girl revealed her mastery. Willow's End had been transformed, and Jonathan, along with all who lived there, had no choice but to recognize the subtle yet undeniable truth. She was the new center of authority, a presence whose influence would continue to grow, quietly but inexorably, shaping the destiny of the plantation and everyone within it. The air over Willow's End carried a new weight, a sense of quiet order that was both palpable and unspoken. The young girl, once purchased for 19 cents at an auction, had transformed the plantation from a place of routine and hierarchy into a complex, thriving system governed by her insight, strategy, and quiet authority. By now, every worker, every servant, and even Jonathan Wycliffe himself recognized that her influence had become the invisible force shaping life on the estate. It had not been an abrupt takeover, nor had it been a struggle for dominance. Instead, her authority had been cultivated through understanding, empathy, and a precise awareness of human nature. She had learned to read people, anticipate conflicts, and shape outcomes in ways that allowed others to feel empowered even as she guided the results. By the time Jonathan fully realized her reach, she had already created a network of influence that extended to every corner of Willow's End. The master himself had come to accept this transformation. At first, he had resisted the realization that he was no longer the sole source of authority, feeling a mixture of pride, curiosity, and unease. Yet he could not deny the results. The household ran more smoothly than it ever had. Disputes among the workers were almost non-existent, and the plantation's productivity had increased dramatically. Where Jonathan had once relied on rules, punishment, and his wealth to maintain control, she relied on perception, logic, and influence, and the results spoke for themselves. One morning, as the sun rose over the fields, the girl moved among the workers, checking the crops and guiding the day's labor. Her presence was quiet but commanding. She spoke softly, yet her words carried weight. Instructions were followed not out of fear, but out of respect. Arguments dissolved before they could escalate, and tasks were completed with precision and care. Jonathan observed from a distance, noting that even the most stubborn overseers deferred to her judgment, recognizing her insight and skill. "You have changed everything here," Jonathan said later, as they walked through the main house. "The plantation, the workers, even the household staff, they all respond to you. I cannot imagine how you do it." She regarded him calmly, her dark eyes steady. "It is not force or fear that moves people, Jonathan," she replied. "Was mastery disguised as humility, power exercised as guidance, and influence extended as subtle control." The workers themselves had grown to revere her. Where once they might have feared a master's wrath, they now followed her counsel willingly. Conflicts were resolved swiftly, productivity increased, and a sense of unity permeated the plantation. Jonathan noted how her ability to inspire trust and cooperation had created an environment far more harmonious than his own authority had ever achieved. Her mastery was not limited to practical matters. She understood people, their desires, fears, and motivations, and used that understanding to guide behavior subtly. She anticipated conflicts before they arose, addressed concerns before they became grievances, and cultivated loyalty without requiring subservience. She had become the invisible force maintaining balance, harmony, and efficiency across Willow's End. One afternoon, Jonathan accompanied her to the southern fields, where a dispute had arisen over equipment allocation. He watched as she approached, her presence alone commanding attention. Without raising her voice, she spoke to the workers, addressed the concerns of the overseers, and reorganized the tasks with a logic and fairness that left everyone satisfied. By the end of the day, the conflict had been resolved, productivity restored, and tension dissipated. Jonathan realized that her influence had become essential. Without her guidance, the plantation would struggle to maintain order and efficiency. Her legacy was evident not only in the daily operations but also in the long-term structure she had created. Systems of accountability, fairness, and productivity were embedded in the plantation's routines. Workers knew their roles, understood expectations, and followed her guidance without question. The household operated like a well-oiled machine, yet it remained human, responsive, and adaptable under her careful oversight. Jonathan, reflecting on her transformation, recognized that she had achieved mastery in a way that few ever could. She had taken a position of minimal expectation, a purchased child, and turned it into authority, respect, and lasting influence. Her intelligence, strategy, and composure had created a legacy that would endure far beyond any individual, including Jonathan himself. Yet she remained humble. She did not boast of her achievements or flaunt her influence. Instead, she continued to guide quietly, observe carefully, and act strategically. Her power was undeniable, yet she wielded it with precision, ensuring that the plantation thrived under her leadership without fear or coercion. The culmination of her mastery was evident in the respect she commanded. Visitors to Willow's End, whether neighboring plantation owners or distant relatives, approached her with a mixture of awe and deference. They recognized her abilities, her lineage, and the authority she had cultivated, and they responded accordingly. Her presence shaped interactions, guided negotiations, and reinforced the prosperity and stability of the plantation. Jonathan, now fully aware of her influence, reflected on the extraordinary journey. He had purchased her for 19 cents, expecting only obedience, yet she had transformed Willow's End through intelligence, strategy, and quiet mastery. She had created a system of influence that was subtle, enduring, and profound. She had shifted the balance of power, not through rebellion or force, but through perception, guidance, and strategic insight. As the sun set over Willow's End, casting long shadows across the fields, the young girl walked among the workers, her presence calm, steady, and commanding. Jonathan followed at a distance, observing the intricate web of influence she had created. It was clear that she had become the true architect of the plantation's success, a master of subtle power whose legacy would endure for generations. Her story, which began with a purchase for a trivial sum, had reached its zenith. She had proven that intelligence, strategy, and understanding could surpass wealth, status, and brute authority. Willow's End was no longer merely a plantation. It was a testament to her quiet mastery, her influence, and her enduring presence. Jonathan, standing on the veranda and watching her move through the fields, understood that she had accomplished what few could ever achieve. She had taken the smallest of beginnings and turned it into authority, respect, and lasting influence. She had become the heartbeat of Willow's End, the invisible force guiding every action, every decision, and every interaction. And as night fell over the sprawling estate, the young girl remained a figure of quiet power. Her mastery was complete, not through fear, wealth, or force, but through understanding, insight, and subtle influence. Willow's End had been transformed, its legacy secured, and its future shaped by a girl who had begun as a purchased child and had emerged as the true master of her world. In the stillness of the night, the plantation rested under her careful guidance. The workers slept, the household was orderly, and the land prospered. She had proven that true power lay not in domination, but in intelligence, perception, and the ability to guide others to act in harmony with vision. The young girl, whose story began with 19 cents, had become legend in her own right. Her influence, her mastery, and her legacy would be remembered long after the sun rose over Willow's End, shaping not only the lives of those within its boundaries, but the very story of power, intelligence, and subtle authority itself. Willow's End had been transformed forever,